Well, thank you very much, Dr. Egbe, for having me. And I've known Dr. Suji for a while now, and it's a pleasure to support this book that he wrote. I share many of his views, and I really do think that the dynamic between development and aid type support for health and the homegrown initiatives, I think the balance right now is a little bit off. And we know that we have some structural challenges, right, on the continent. We know that globally, we're 16% of the world's population, yet we carry 23% of the disease burden. But despite carrying 23% of the disease burden, only 1% of global health funding goes to Africa. So there's a huge disconnect and a mismatch between what we need and what's happening. Our governments can't do it all. On average in Africa, we're at about 48% of the needs that our governments can actually address, that they can budget for and they can actually release the budget to do. So there is a space for partnering with development institutions. There's a space for that. But I find, just as Dr. Suji has outlined in his book, that there's an imbalance that makes it so that we are, constantly focusing on the lower value health interventions rather than saving the aid money or the foreign money to do different things. It's true, we can at this point manage our routine immunization, we can fix our primary health care, we can train our health workers. There's a lot we can do, and save maybe some of the foreign dollars and support for things that are higher value to us as Africans. In terms of the failures, I mean, this is always hard to say, but it's factual, right? The failures are multiple across the board. We don't have the right mechanisms, for instance, to incentivize or to even allow manufacturing of medical supplies and equipment on the continent. So if we just think about, some of the lessons that we learned from the COVID pandemic, even things like saline solution and bandages and needles were imported, right? So there's a reason why that's happening, and it's because there are no incentives for people to invest in those areas in Africa. And so the biggest failure and that's perpetuated is that, oh, well, there's help coming. So even if we don't know how to make vaccines, or we don't have enough vaccines, it's okay. Gavi will show up with enough vaccines. If we didn't plan for TB or HIV/AIDS or malaria, it's okay. The Global Fund is there and they'll help us. And I think that attitude is what keeps us not investing in what we need to do. Now we have the structural challenges, right? Infrastructure is not there. We don't have enough power. We don't have enough, we don't have like an agency that would regulate these medicines across the continent that is up and active right now that can do this. So even if you made an investment and set up a factory, say in Nigeria, or let me pick a smaller country, let me pick my country, Niger. The market in Niger is too small for you to make that investment pay off. But at the same time, if there's not an agency that we all adhere to that would say, yes, this medicine that's made in Niger is absolutely, it's the same as what Pfizer or what Roche could make, then the product won't be sold. So we have things that we really need to pay attention to. Again, lessons from COVID, the help will come to us after people have taken care of themselves. And so if we want to be in the driver's seat of our own health, we need to have African companies, African investors really look at how we can make a lot of the products, the commodities, the things that we need to manage our own health on our own continent.
Thank you, Ms. Zouera. You actually raised, I think, a key issue when you mentioned the issue of incentives and really sort of encouraging some local production or people being, or countries being self-responsible.
I was having a discussion with a former bank colleague not long ago, and the discussion was around how a lot of this aid is displacing investments that would have been made. So I'll give you a real life example. Right now, we're talking about RUTF. Yesterday, I moderated a discussion between USAID and UNICEF and all the different donors that are looking at, child malnutrition across the African continent. And a lot of the conversation was about RUTF. Now, the one topic that I had to keep bringing up is, well, we can make RUTF in Africa. We don't have to keep importing. Like, the idea of giving more support to foreign manufacturers of RUTF to now ship it to Africa to help our kids then displaces the existing RUTF manufacturers in Nigeria and the local solutions that are already there. That is a challenge that we need to also address and face. But in terms of incentives, I think, again, if government would commit to off-taking some basic commodities, we know how much Panadol, how much malaria medicine, how much of these basic commodities, we know how much we buy every year. If government and local governments, state governments would commit to buying guaranteed offtakes from people who would produce it, you'd find a lot more people willing to make the investment and produce locally. So it's a bigger problem that is all in this AFCFTA. We're going to have this continental free trade zone. Within that, we're going to have, all kinds of incentives for pharma. I think, again, the COVID crisis shook everybody because I think it was outrageous that we couldn't even get testing kits because we weren't on the list, and we couldn't make anybody give it to us or sell it to us even with our own funds because they just didn't have enough. And it was very clear that if there's another pandemic, we won't be ready, right? I think we escaped this one rather, well, but who knows what the next crisis could be. And so these are really thought-provoking and important issues that Dr. Sochi's bringing up in his book, because if we're not ready, the next one could be devastating.
Yeah. So interesting you brought up the pandemic, which was probably one of the greatest shocks to most countries around the world, including in Africa. And you're right, maybe the direct health impact was probably less than many people had thought it would be.
Mm-hmm.
But how is the Aliko Dangote Foundation working? What are you doing, or how are you contributing to ensure that Africa is better prepared than it was before COVID?
Actually, a really difficult question, Dr. Egbe. And the reason why it's a difficult question is because what we need to do is so much in terms of prevention, awareness raising, structurally having more effective and functional primary healthcare centers. All this is what needs to be done. By ourselves, we're just one small contributor to this, right? It's not like we can do all this by ourselves. So it's working in partnership. It's working very closely with the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency. We have a program that we're supporting through PISHA and the Private Sector Alliance, Private Sector Health Alliance of Nigeria, where the program is called Adopt a Healthcare Facility. And basically, we want to get the private sector to adopt at least one primary healthcare center in all 774 LGAs. The idea being that we could demonstrate how a PHC should work, and that once people see this, they will demand more from their local chair people and their local administrators.
Interesting when you describe your approach to supporting the primary healthcare system in Nigeria. I was wondering, are there any other approaches in which you're supporting the development of African institutions and leaders in health?
So we a lot of the support to that we would like to, continue to give to organizations like NIMR, the Nigerian Institute of Medical Research, support to Redeemer University, where Dr. Kapi is. He's the guy who, sequenced the genome for Ebola and for COVID-19. How do we, support those people and give them literally more money to do more studies, but to study things that will be helpful to us, not open-ended research, because we couldn't do all that we do and then fund long-term research also. But amazing role during COVID. I mean, they did what I think the general sense of what John was doing there was, people were really impressed and blown away. He did a great job. And so now it's like, okay, how do we keep building institutions like this? How do we do the medicines agency the same way so that we can be serious about producing more of the commodities that we need on our continent for ourselves and by ourselves?
Yeah. So, Ms. Zouera, thanks so much. Are there any final words you have before? I know you have to run off to the UNGA meetings in New York. We're so grateful you took some time out.
Of course. He's a good friend, and I like what he wrote. I like the book, and I like what he's trying to do. I think my most what I really want people to take away from this is like read the book and really see what Dr. Suji is saying. It's controversial. Some people will be upset, but it's what we need to hear because it's the truth. And if we don't start, telling ourselves the truth about what we need to do, I think we're just wasting a lot of time pointlessly. We should look at our issues, we should face them and do our very best to do better. So, well done on the book, Dr. Suji, and I know that we all can't wait to read it cover to cover. I mean, I read the summary, the preface, it was the foreword. It's really very good, very well thought through.